here this early in the morning surprises me. That you all made it here on time. I'm actually quite surprised. I was heady subjects and everything, and here it is, 8 o'clock in the morning, and you're all awake. And hopefully by the end of my time with you this morning, that'll still be the case. Because, you never know. It's an interesting thing for me to be here at this particular conference, given the caliber and the quality of the people, the other people who are actually speaking from Rosaria, Dr. Anderson, and their personal stories, Dr. Butterfield's personal story, and of course Brian Anderson's work all over the world, and all over the country, I should say, on these issues. So I often wondered and asked myself, what the heck am I doing here? Given my background. But as I was hearing Dr. Butterfield's story yesterday, I heard it twice actually, once with the students and then last night again. The novelty did not wear off on me. Second time. Didn't. Stayed with me. Because of the affinity I have with that story, because of my own conversion out of a worldview that defined me, or that I let define me in a certain way. So I want to say that her experience isn't like just her experience. My experience isn't just my experience. If we're looking at trying to change hearts and minds for the redemption of Jesus Christ through through the grace offered through Him, we have to realize they're not them and we're not us, and there's an us versus them kind of mentality. Everyone here has a background. If you're a born-again believer, you weren't born a believer. If you were born again a believer, that means you have a former background just like Dr. Butterfield does, just like I do. And there's nothing really different in the overall picture except for the details. Those details matter. Each one of us is trying to change hearts and minds, and if I can be changed from a worldview that I embrace so zealously, Dr. Butterfield can be a child of Christ now, a child of God because of what she's gone through, and you have too, and we should have hope for the world around us. Now, I open up with that only because what I want to share with you this morning aren't the politics, aren't these sort of legal machinations that go into the ongoing equality debate. What I want to talk about is the fundamental foundation, a theological foundation, but just an objective foundation for the morals we're talking about. Because every one of these issues, one of these words, equality, dignity, respect, relationship, all these things are about moral values, aren't they? They're about moral issues, moral paradigms in our lives. What we're looking for is a foundation for that. When we make the statement that everyone should be equal based on whatever their characteristics might be or our commonalities, we're making some assumptions, aren't we? We're making an assumption that that word equality means something. There's an objective reality to equality, that everyone ought to be treated equally. Stop and think for a moment. Why? Why? I believe in equality. When the Declaration of Independence tells me that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with inalienable rights, I believe that, and I think everybody in this room believes that. My question for you is this: why? Why do you believe that? What is the foundation for your belief that human beings are equal? Let me tell you a story. Now, I don't want to equate ethnicity with all the other issues in terms of the equality debate, but when I was 11 years old, 10 or 11 years old, my middle brother actually, and I went up to a pizza shop, a local pizza shop in the town I grew up in. And we went and got some pizza, and we go there quite often. We go there all the time and get pizza on our bikes. We'd get the pizza, and because we're boys, we're semi-disgusting, so we would actually use the outside garbage can, like flat garbage can, as our table, believe it or not. Your young boys are just gross. I was, they are too. So as we're sitting outside and we're enjoying our pizza on top of this garbage can, saying it makes me embarrassed, but there you go. I look inside the window of the pizza shop I was literally just in, and there's a bit of a glare on this big window. So I'm not really looking at anybody in particular, I just happen to be looking through the glare and seeing the reflection of the cars whizzing by me on the main road. But then I see through the glare, and I see something. And it's the person who literally just gave me my food, looking right at me with an intense look of hatred. And his hand is raised in a vulgar gesture towards me. I'm 10, I'm 11 years old. I'm stunned. What in the world is he doing? So I don't know why I did this. He's about 18 years old or so, and I walked into the pizza shop and I said, "Are you doing that to me?" Now I wasn't like, "You doing that to me?" I was 10. So I went, is that for me? And he said, "That's right, camel jockey. What are you going to do about it?" He tried to steal my dignity. He was telling me I was not equal with him. This young man, now he's 18, so he's going to do things that 18-year-old boys, I think, do sometimes, but this is what he said to me. I'm 10. What in the world is he doing? Who does he think he is that he can steal my dignity from me? Take that which is sort of a part of who I am as a human being and say, that's less than me. And I'm going to actually act like it and make sure you know it. That kind of thing leaves an impression. It's been 30 years since that day, and I remember it very vividly. That isn't even close to the kind of things that other people have been subjected to based on insults and these kind of things. But what is the point of bringing up that story? The point is this, that everyone here in this room, judging by the silence, smarts a little bit at that, right? Everyone here sort of goes, "Oh, I wish you didn't experience that." And if you've experienced it, then you know what I'm talking about. But everyone here feels that because we have an assumption that human beings are equal and ought to be treated with dignity and respect. There's a moral underpinning there. And again, I have the question for you, why? Upon what basis? We're talking about all these things, equality and dignity and human value, but does this actually make sense in a world where there is no such thing as the transcendent, where there is no such thing as a transcendent source of human value and dignity? Because if we are the arbiters, if we're the ones who determine moral values and dignity and who's equal and who's not, or what should be equal and what's not, or who has the right to say what they have to say, and all these things, when we're in trouble, because if we're the ones who give the rules, history has shown us we're very bad at this. We are notoriously bad at this. Is there a source, something beyond us? Let me give you the words of Lawrence Krauss, an astrophysicist out of Arizona State University, who wrote his book, A Universe Out of Nothing, who tells us that the universe popped into existence by a fluctuation of the quantum vacuum and the energy that's roiling around in the quantum vacuum in the beginning of all things. He says that we just popped into existence. And in an article in the LA Times, you know what he calls humanity? A bit of pollution. We are all, on a cosmic scale, just pollution. What a strange thing to say to somebody else, isn't it? Somebody who, my guess is, Lawrence Krauss actually champions equality and says that all people should be created equal, yet he calls us a bit of pollution. There's no real purpose, there's no real impetus, there's no real prevision in mind for the creation of human beings or the universe itself. We're all just pollution. Each one of us, we're like dust in the wind, to quote a Kansas song. Can I do that in Oklahoma? Is that okay? Richard Dawkins, the world's most famous atheist, actually, says in one of his books, when he defines what human beings actually are, when he defines purpose, objective purpose, he says, we are machines for propagating DNA. It is every living object's sole reason for being. The sole reason for your being is to propagate DNA. So the question is this: does that sound like the foundation for objective purpose, equality, and dignity for all people? How can it be? How can it be? Stephen Jay Gould, the late paleontologist and evolutionary biologist out of Harvard, is very uncomfortable, I think, with that kind of sheer, stark, just this is the way it is, we're just DNA machines. He's uncomfortable with that, and rightfully so. Do any one of you look in the mirror as you're fixing your hair or putting on your tie and say, I am a snappy-dressed DNA machine today? No one does that. When a newborn fits in your hand, barely big enough, well, for my hands, barely big enough to fit in your hand, do you think this is a really cute DNA propagator? No one does that. None of us do that. And Stephen Jay Gould is uncomfortable with this, though he's an atheist, and this is what he says about how we got here. He says, we are here because one odd group of fishes had a peculiar fin anatomy that could transform into legs for terrestrial creatures, because comets struck the Earth, and wiped out dinosaurs, thereby giving mammals a chance not otherwise available, so thank your lucky stars in a literal sense. Because the Earth never froze entirely during an ice age, because a small and tenuous species arising in Africa 250,000 years ago has managed so far to survive by hook and by crook. We may yearn for a higher answer, he says, but none exists. This explanation, though superficially troubling, if not terrifying, is ultimately liberating and exhilarating. We cannot read the meaning of life passively in the facts of nature. We must construct these answers ourselves from our own wisdom and ethical sense. There is no other way. Understand what he's saying? If his explanation for how we got here is right, I can't see how he's wrong in terms of the higher answers. There are no higher answers, and we have to construct these answers for ourselves out of our own wisdom and ethical sense. And the problem is this: how in the world do you have anything like objective equality, objective moral dignity, objective purpose for humanity if we are the ones who create it? Because here's the problem. What does it mean for something to be objective, an objective truth? An objective truth is something that is true irrespective of your opinion of it. Something is objectively true if it does not depend on human beings and their opinions, like the fact that water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. It boils at that degree, at that temperature, whether I think it does or doesn't. That's an objective truth. We want to say, and the whole debate that whether it's racial or it's sexual identity, or whatever it might be, we have all these statements about human dignity and equality. All those statements are statements about objective truths. We're assuming they're objectively true. That means they have to be true irrespective of human opinion, right? And if there is nothing but human opinion, then they're not objectively true. As Stephen Jay Gould would tell you, they're subjectively true. They depend on human opinion, and human opinion shifts as easily as sand. Not long ago in this very country, it was legal to own certain people. The majority thought it was okay to own certain people. It wasn't true then. It wasn't okay then. It just happened to be majority rule. It wasn't objectively okay. It was wrong then, and it's wrong now. But you see, the logical outworking of these kinds of explanations, that we have no transcendent base for our moral values, causes our very ideas about morality to shift, that we can just change them based on who happens to have the most votes, who happens to give the most money to the campaign, and in some countries, who has the biggest guns. That's the way it works. Think about this. When you look at some of the philosophers of our age, Kai Nielsen's a good example. Kai Nielsen is a first-rank philosopher out of Canada, and he basically says this, and I'm going to summarize his quote, talking about the value that reason has, that reason somehow is the arbiter of that which is moral and true, and equality comes from that. He says, I've looked to find how reason can be the justification for moral values and absolute moral equality among people. And he says, look, reflection on this depresses me, but we have been unable to prove that reason, even aided by a knowledge of all the facts, will get you to morality. This is an atheist talking, someone who does not believe in God, and he laments, he's depressed over the fact that reason, even with the knowledge of all the facts, will not get you to morality. It will not get you to equality. Joel Marks, another atheist out of University of New Haven, who is an ethicist. He spent a lot of time, he used to spend a lot of time, I should say, trying to write columns and articles justifying objective moral values, that morality exists outside of God. And he spilled a lot of ink doing this. And then eventually he had what he called his reversed epiphany, that he realized that there is no morality if there is no God. And he basically says, and I'm summarizing him as well, that he suddenly realized that the fundamentalists are actually right. If there is no God, then there is no such thing as morality. And because there is no God, I am now an amoralist. Not an immoralist, not someone who believes in just whatever you feel like doing, but that which is convenient and good for society, that keeps us from killing each other and eating each other, that's good. But to call it moral is wrong. It's just fundamentally wrong. These are our professors. These are our thinkers. These are atheists who are acknowledging the fact that there is no transcendent source for morality, so these ideas are all constructs of our mind. We want to cry out that there is such a thing as justice, fairness, equality, dignity, independent of human opinions. And then we say there is no God, so we actually undercut the very idea that we can have an objective equality, dignity, fairness, and justice. We are notoriously fickle. You know, when I was a kid, I saw this thing on a magnet on a refrigerator, and it said the most profound statement about this. It described reality as we know it on a magnet on a refrigerator. It says this: as a rule, a man's a fool. When it's hot, he wants it cool. When it's cool, he wants it hot. He wants it hot. What he has, I want it not. Our morality is as schizophrenic as the weather in Oklahoma. We shift so easily. We shift so easily. We want there to be objective morality, but then we undercut the very idea. So we want to say there's objective morality, then we saw off the limb we're sitting on. So we don't have it. What does the gospel have to say to us? How can we actually show that the things our friends and neighbors wish were true actually are true, that there are objective values? How do we show them this? When you look at the way the Christian response is, you look at from the sciences that are beginning to tell us more and more how intricately designed the universe actually is for the creation of life. I mean, even atheists will tell you that the universe appears to be so exquisitely fine-tuned for us to exist, from the initial conditions of the universe to the way our solar system is set up, to the way the microwave background radiation works, to the energy levels throughout the universe. All of it seems, all these things, like 100 different properties we're aware of now, are so exquisitely tuned that even if one of them were off by a hair's breadth, no life is possible anywhere. So it seems like the world has been, as I think Frederick Hoyle, to quote him, someone's been monkeying with the physics to create us so that we can arise. That shows purpose. You don't design something for no reason. That shows that there is an objective reason, that someone who's been monkeying with the physics actually has created something for you and me to be here. There's a purpose behind us. So telescopes tell us that. The microscopes tell us that. When you look at the beauty of the DNA strand, when you look at the intricacies and the level of design of the DNA strand, with its 3.1 billion bits of information that are the instructions for creating a human being, all these things knit together show us something, that not only is the universe designed for life in general, but DNA is put together for your life specifically. That you have an imprint on you that shows value and dignity in an objective sense. Science is showing us this. Whereas a secular framework would tell you that you are here by accident. You survive by hook and by crook, as Gould would say. The Bible tells you were created specifically, on purpose and for a purpose. Science tends to corroborate that. You know what's interesting about that? When you look at the Bible's actual words about how, in fact, you were created, it doesn't say you were built. It doesn't say you were built. It doesn't say you were even designed, although you were. You know how it describes you and everyone else, even them? It describes us as having been knit together in our mother's womb. Knit. Knit. Not built. You were knit together. You know, I've got a lot of sweaters, and they keep me warm, especially in Michigan. They all came, almost all of them, came from a factory, where they were all a template, and the machines just churned out a bunch of sweaters that look just like mine. There's thousands of sweaters that look just like mine. I have one particular sweater that has value to me more than any other sweater. It's the one my mother knit for me to bring me home in the hospital in. And I brought all my children home from the hospital after they were born in that very same sweater. Because when she made it, with every cross-stitch, loop, patch, whatever it is you guys do when you knit, she thought of me. She thought, Abdu, my son. Abdu, my son. Your DNA is knit together to create you. To create you. People wonder, well, what's the purpose? If life seems to show a purpose, if there's an objective purpose to everything, if the universe seems to be constructed so that we can live, and our DNA is knit together so that I specifically can be here, what is that purpose? What is the meaning of life? What is the underpinning of the moral basis? What is the moral basis for all of us? You know, this is one of those questions that everyone says this is the hardest question in the world to answer. You always see this in like TV shows and movies where someone's trying to find out the meaning of life, and right before they find out the meaning of life from the guy who's on top of the mountain by the ashram, and he's sitting in the lotus position and he's chanting something, and he goes to open his mouth, all of a sudden it cuts to commercial. Because no one knows the answer, and that's the reason. I mean, I do a lot of traveling, and I was traveling and I was in Colorado, and I like to have background noise on when I'm working. I have a hard time with absolute silences, because I have 3 small children. And I found out something counterintuitive. When you're in the house and 3 small children are in the house and there's absolute silence, that's a bad thing. So I have a hard time with absolute silence. It distracts me. Something's wrong in the room. Something's wrong in the world. So I actually need background noise. So I'm looking through the television to find something that won't distract me, yet will also be background noise enough so that I can continue working. And I happen to come across a television show, Everybody Loves Raymond. Now in this particular episode, Everybody Loves Raymond, Raymond's daughter, I don't know if you know the premise of the story, the premise of the show. The show is about this father who's basically a bumbler. He means well, but he messes up all the time, and he ends up fixing it in the end, but he's always trying to be a good dad or a good husband, and he goofs it up. But eventually he gets it right. Well, in this particular episode, his daughter, who's sort of coming of age, asks him the question, where do babies come from? And he says some ridiculous story about storks or something like this, and his wife is like, Ray, you can't let her believe that, because if you let her believe that falsehood, so you can be comfortable, eventually someone's going to tell her the truth, and she's not going to trust us anymore. Go and fix this. So the whole episode is him trying to actually fix the problem and think of a way he can have the talk with his daughter without embarrassing the heck out of himself or her. So he's a little worried about this. You can tell, by the way, I was totally distracted by this television show and got no work done. So at the end of the show, he finally gets, I'm going to tell her this, tell her like it is. He walks into her bedroom, and there she is playing with her dolls in the bed, and he goes and sits down next to her and says, honey, you asked Daddy a question about where babies come from, or where people come from. When a man and a woman love each other and they're married, and he starts in she goes, whoa, Dad, I know all that. My question is, why does God put us here? Now that's the question he wasn't ready for. So because no one knows the answer, he goes, honey, it's because heaven is crowded. Now it's funny and it's silly and it's a little stupid in terms of its answer, but we laugh at it because it's like, well, it's the most important question, but it's also the one you can't answer. What's the meaning of life? What is the moral value of human existence? Why are we here? And it's all summed up in one actual sentence. The chief end of man is to glorify God and delight in His presence forever. The chief end of man is to glorify God and delight in His presence forever. That is a statement about relationship. That is a statement about the purpose you were created for. You were created for a relationship. And in fact, that's particularly timely in our day and age when relationships are the foundation of the debate. We're created for relationship, for godly, specific kinds of relationships. That's why everybody in this room has a relationship, and if you don't have one, you want one, and if you had one and you lost it, you mourn its loss. Why? Because it's so important to us. It's who we are. We're relational beings. What explains the fact that we crave relationships, that we debate about them in court? What explains all this? A mindless universe that did not have you in mind at all? A harsh reality that looks to kill you rather than help you? No. If the cause is impersonal and we're the effect, we should be impersonal. Yet here we are, craving relationships, debating about their very existence. Why? Because the creation, the cause of all things, is itself, or himself, a relational being. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, together for eternity in the community of the Trinity. Defining relationship. That's why you want it, because He is it. You as the effect are a reflection of the cause. It's funny because we're trying to make these things ourselves from our own wisdom and ethical sense, as Stephen Jay Gould would say. And this is a funny thing because it echoes something about us, that we want this autonomy, we want this freedom. The sort of Luciferian idea that we are the ones who can determine our destinies. We're going to take up our sword and yell sort of a William Wallace, freedom kind of a thing, that kind of thing. And it echoes of Protagoras. Protagoras was the one who said that man is the measure of all things, that we're the ones who decide all things. And again, if that's the case, I'm terrified. Stephen Jay Gould said it was superficially troubling, if not terrifying. He was wrong about that. It's fundamentally terrifying and troubling if we're the measure of all things. But yet Tom Flynn, secular humanist, says, secular humanism maintains that through a process of value inquiry informed by scientific and reflective thought, men and women can reach rough agreement concerning values, crafting ethical systems that deliver optimal results for human beings in a broad spectrum of circumstances. Now that sounds really, really sophisticated. But I want you to catch a part of that statement. Through scientific and reflective thought, men and women can reach rough agreement concerning values. Let's look at the past 2,000 years and see how exactly rough that agreement is. It's pretty rough. It's pretty rough. He's saying that man can be his own savior. And history tells us time and time again that the evidence is exactly against that reality. We are the problem. How are we the solution? See, any worldview that's true has to have three facets to it: logical consistency, empirical adequacy, and existential relevance. It has to have all three of those things. If it doesn't have logical consistency, then chuck it. If it doesn't have empirical evidence or data to back it up, then chuck it. If it's not relevant to your life, then why believe it? Logical consistency tells me this, that we are notoriously bad at determining rough agreement between ourselves. So how can we be the solution if we are in fact the problem? That's a logical inconsistency, I think, but we want consistency. G.K. Chesterton once was asked to respond, him and a bunch of essayists in Great Britain were asked to respond to the question, what's wrong with the world? He had the most brilliant answer out of everyone who responded. It was a simple one-liner. He said, "Dear sirs, I am G.K. Chesterton." He's pointing out something. It's us. The empirical data shows us that it's us who's the problem. You know, there's not very much that's redeeming about 24-hour news. I think 24-hour available news is probably one of the worst inventions the media's come up with in the past 30 years. I do. I just think it gives us more reasons to say things that no one really cares about and speculate endlessly because we've got to fill the time. I'm not blaming the media on some things, but the fact that we have to fill 24 hours full of things to talk about means we have rank speculation and all kinds of things that are just opinions. But here's the one benefit of 24-hour news. If you want evidence that humanity is notoriously bad at determining objective values and dignity for human beings, just turn on the news any time of the day, 3 o'clock in the morning if you want, and watch for 5 minutes. You'll find all the evidence you need. That's the empirical adequacy of the Christian worldview that tells us that we should expect there to be very serious problems in human strife because we have original sin. Dr. Butterfield touched on this yesterday and so beautifully talked about how all of us are sort of born that way. And this realization changes minds and changes hearts. I want to quote from you from C.E.M. Joad, who was himself sort of a leftist socialist who was trying to transform things, and he thought if we just have an optimistic view that human beings are all good, I don't mean valuable, it's just that we're good and we're morally good and we'll always seek the greater possible good, that disappointed him. Here's what he says. It's a lengthy quote, but bear it in mind, okay, because this is important because our thinking people are realizing the truth. This is what Joad says. "It is because the efforts of the generation of my youth sprang from a misconception of the nature of man's lot that they have been so largely unsuccessful. To put it more specifically, to reject the doctrine of original sin was to fall victim to a shallow optimism in regard to human nature, which led men to think that the millennium was just round the corner, waiting to be introduced by adequately and psychoanalyzed, prosperous socialists. It is because we rejected the doctrine of original sin that we on the left were always being disappointed by the refusal of people to be reasonable, by the subservience of intellect to emotion, by the failure of true socialism to arrive, by the behavior of nations and politicians, by the preference of the masses for Hollywood over Shakespeare and for Mr. Sinatra over Beethoven. Above all, by the recurrent fact of war." This is where he sees all this leading, this sort of misguided view and optimism. He says, "To believe as I have grown to believe in the fundamental and in this life ineradicable nature of human sinfulness is intolerable unless there is some source of guidance and assistance outside ourselves to which we can turn for comfort and assurance. Presently, the fact of sin and evil came to present themselves with such overwhelming strength that unless one were able to seek assistance, if not for the overcoming of them, at least not for the succumbing to them, one would give way to despair. Sin is so bad, he's saying, that if you didn't find a source to cling on to help you get through this, you would be in despair. Then he says this, the more I knew of it, the more Christianity seemed to offer just that strengthening and assistance. And with that, the rationalist, optimist philosophy, by the light of which I had hitherto done my best to live, came to seem intolerably trivial and superficial. A shallow-rooted plant, which growing to maturity amid the lush and leisured optimism of the 19th century, was quite unfitted to withstand the bleaker winds that blew through ours. I abandoned it, he says, and in abandoning that, found myself a Christian. If we are the arbiters, there's a serious problem because the evidence shows us, we are bad at this. And what is equal today won't be equal in 200 years because what was equal 200 years ago is not equal today. The moral relativism is a shift. If there is no God, then they're right. But I think that our desire to find an objective truth shows us that maybe there is one. Maybe there is one. That's the empirical adequacy. You know, Jesus tells you like it is. He doesn't tell you what you want to hear. He doesn't. Now, I want to hear that I'm saved by grace. I want to hear that he's paid the penalty that I deserve. But you know what I want to hear? I don't want to hear that I deserve it. Thank you for paying the price that, other people deserve, but I don't. As a Muslim, I didn't want to believe that. I wanted to believe that I could actually work my way up to please God. But Jesus doesn't tell you what you want to hear. He tells you what you need to hear because he's not a pitch man. He's not a con man. He's telling you like it is. Someone who wants to gain a bunch of followers on Twitter doesn't tell you how bad you are. Yet Jesus says, out of the heart comes evil, murder, adultery, theft, false testimony, and slander. He described you and me. And then he said, come and join me. What a strange recruiting poster that is. Yet he does it. He tells you like it is. And we have to be self-reflective on this as Christians, by the way. Christian Hoffmeister said this, if you think that the parables of Jesus apply to other people, you've missed the point. It's true. So God, I believe, is the foundation of moral values, of equality and justice and these kind of things. Darwinism, by the way, even in principle, can't get us there. It can't get us there. By definition, Darwinism is the idea that might makes right, at least for survival. I mean, Darwinism is the idea that random mutations or unguided mutations acting in the genes create differentiation between people within or organisms within a species, and that survival of the fittest tells us that those who are stronger, faster, smarter will be able to get the resources better, they'll survive the calamities better, and the weaker will die. And we're constantly evolving into a state of betterness. Better in terms of survival. Not moral, just survival. There's no moral component to it whatsoever. Michael Ruse would tell you this, atheist philosopher of evolution, would tell you that there's no moral component to evolution. It is amoral. The weaker will always lose out to the stronger and the faster. So there's no equality. Equality is a myth. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this. In fact, Thomas Nagel, a professor of philosophy at New York University, brilliant man, absolutely brilliant man, and a very honest, by the way, atheist, wrote in his book, Mind and Cosmos, he said, the emergence of human consciousness and the emergence of conscience, or the recognition of moral values, is unexplainable by naturalism. We can't explain it naturalistically. But he says, there's only naturalism. We need to find another way that doesn't rely on God to tell us what morality is, but we don't have an answer just yet. But we need to find one in what he calls his ungrounded intellectual preference. He doesn't want there to be a God who tells us these things, but there's no better game in town right now, so we better think fast. Secular humanism, ladies and gentlemen, is a contradiction in terms. Humanism is the idea that all human beings have equal value and dignity and are deserving of respect. But you don't need God to tell you that. I affirm the humanist who wants to believe that. Of course, I agree with them. But you need to have a transcendent source to tell you that's the way it is. And by the way, not only do you philosophically need that, but it's actually worked out in history that way. Sure, Christians and other people of other faiths, of religious faiths, have done horrible things over the course of history. We're human beings. Doesn't surprise me that they've done bad things because the Bible tells us we will do bad things. Doesn't surprise me. Yet, when it comes to equality, the example of Christ has set the baseline. It has set the framework upon which equality is built. Whether it's Christians helping the infected on plague ships, or going to Africa and helping those infected with Ebola. Interesting, isn't it? That in the early days of Christianity, we were helping people infected with plague, and even now we're still doing the same thing because of what Christ did and the example we follow. Mark Twain, himself a skeptic, made an interesting statement. History doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. Why? David Bentley Hart actually explains some of the ways in which why we see equality, why we see ethics and morality throughout our society. He says, the ethical presuppositions intrinsic to modernity, for instance, are palliated fragments and haunting echoes of Christian moral theology. Even the most ardent secularists among us generally cling to notions of human rights, economic and social justice, providence for the indigent, legal equality, or basic human dignity that pre-Christian Western culture would have found not so much foolish as unintelligible. These are new ideas. Well, they're 2,000 years old, but they were new when Christianity arrived on the scene. It is simply the case, Bentley Hart says, that we distant children of the pagans would not be able to believe in any of these things. They would never have occurred to us had our ancestors not once believed that God is love, that charity is the foundation of all virtues, that all of us are equal before the eyes of God, that to fail to feed the hungry or care for the suffering is to sin against Christ, and that Christ laid down his life for the least of his brethren. What is he saying? In the Roman Empire, equality was laughed at. You know the word person comes from the Latin persona, which means mask? Something artificial put on you. Being born didn't qualify you to be a person. The state had to give you that status, whether you were rich enough, or you did enough service in the military, or you owned enough property, or you happened to do something. Who knows what it was, or who you knew, maybe networked you into personhood status. But being born wasn't enough. Being a human being wasn't enough to give you personhood status. And it was the Christians who began to say, everyone is equal. Why did they say that? Why did that start to infect the Roman Empire? Because Christianity tells us this, that God so loved the world, that's everyone, that the Father gave his only begotten Son. Now why? Because we're all equal. We're all equally sinners. There's a phrase, an Arabic phrase, "Qulna fal-hawa sawa." Now, that roughly translates to we're all in the same boat, but literally in Arabic, because Arabic's a little more colorful, we're all in the same wind. Or we're all smelling the same foul air, by the way, that we create. We're all equal. We're all equally sinners. Yet God so loved the world equally that he gave his only begotten Son, so that anyone, that's everyone who's invited, whosoever shall believe, that's anyone, will not perish but have everlasting life. That's equality. That is a statement of the equality of our condition and the equal opportunity we have for redemption. That's what it is. The Christian worldview says that. And from that springs the abolitionist movement. From that springs the moral stance we have today. So when atheists will tell you that God is an immoral creature or a character of fiction in the Bible, and they have this moral platform they pontificate over and say how bad God is, that moral basis they're judging him from, that comes from Christianity. They're borrowing it. They're using our bats to club us over the head with. We need to point this out. So powerful and so true is this idea that I think the Christian moral framework is there, that we need a transcendent being to show us that what we wish were true is actually true, that Marcelo Pera, himself an atheist and social critic and sociologist, says this: in the end, we must choose, as the history of liberalism and modernity shows, the Christian choice to give oneself to God or to act as if God existed have yielded the best results. This choice still has great advantages also in the field of public ethics. If we live as Christians, we will be wiser and more aware of the dangers we face. We will not separate morality from truth. We will not confuse moral autonomy with any free choice. We will not treat individuals, whether the unborn or the dying, as things. We will not allow all desires to be transformed into rights. We will not confine reason within the boundaries of science, nor will we feel alone in a society of strangers or oppressed by the state that appropriates us because we no longer know how to guide ourselves. Our moral norms, and with them our coexistence in all the institutions, the very same ones that have been passed down and preserved for us in the civilization in which we are living, at times troubled and ineffective, at times satisfied and hopeful, would wither and die if they were to cut themselves off from Christianity. Marcelo Pera is an atheist. And yet he recognizes that that which he wishes were true is actually true because of the gospel. We need logical consistency, empirical adequacy, and finally, existential relevance. We need to have these truths, these ideas, these moral truths be relevant to us and in our lives, and in our struggle to find equality, and our struggle to find purpose, and the sacred, whether it's in sexuality, whether it's in marriage, whether it's in our friendships, whether it's in our reading, whether it's in our struggles against pain and suffering in this world. It needs to be relevant to us in some way. Yet Lawrence Krauss tells us this, that if we came from nothing, he says, if you got rid of us and all the stars and all the galaxies and all the planets and all the aliens and everybody, then the universe would be exactly the same. If you got rid of us, the universe and the stars and the galaxies will be exactly the same. His statement, and I quote, we're completely irrelevant. Yet we're having these debates about the relevance of our differences. We've been trying to make the gospel message relevant to the culture, ladies and gentlemen. We've been trying to do that as a church, making it relevant to the culture. We've forgotten something very, very important. The message itself is a statement about relevance. Krauss says we're irrelevant. The gospel says, because of the cross, your moral choices are infinitely relevant. Otherwise, there's no reason for a cross. You are relevant to God, so much so that he dies. He sends his son dies to pay the debt that you owe so that we can be saved. If my moral choices were just dust in the wind, then there's no need for a cross. The cross is the exclamation point to the statement, you are relevant. And only the gospel tells you that. Now I want to close with something, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. It's a poem, it's part of a poem by Emily Bronte, The Prisoner. Now in this poem, she's describing this heroine who is a prisoner on this island, and the jailer comes and mocks her. And there's a young man who comes and mocks this prisoner as well in this prison. And it's a beautiful poem. Absolutely read it. You see the redemption. You see the beauty of someone who has hope, clinging to hope. But the prisoner actually, speaking from the point of view of the prisoner, there's a realization of her lot, of the fact that she's in these chains in this prison, but it's a metaphorical prison in some sense because the prison is, in fact, that the human beings have created their own prison, their own moral prison. She says, oh, dreadful is the check, intense the agony, when the ear begins to hear and the eye begins to see, when the pulse begins to throb, the brain to think again, the soul to feel the flesh, and the flesh to feel the chain. Yet I would lose no sting, would wish no torture less. The more that anguish racks, the earlier it will bless. And robed in fires of hell, or bright with heavenly shine, if I but herald death, the vision is divine. The redemption comes. It's coming. And then the prisoner stops speaking, and the young man who's come to mock her with the jailer begins to speak about this prisoner and the hope of redemption. He says, she ceased to speak, and we, on answering, turned to go. We had no further power to work the captive woe. Her cheek, her gleaming eye, declared that man had given a sentence unapproved and overruled by heaven. Redemption. Redemption is about that, taking that which is flawed and smoothing it out. Taking that which is marred and restoring it. Ladies and gentlemen, we want equality and justice and purpose and morality. We want these things to be true. We want to see them, but we don't have a self-reflection enough to know that we're the ones who marred them. We were created on purpose. Science tells us this. Philosophy tells us this. Our experience tells us this. What is that purpose? It was relationship and communion with God, because there and there alone do you find dignity. Because you aren't equal because of your physical characteristics. You're not. I'm bigger than almost all of you. Some of you are faster than me. Some of you are smarter than me. Some of you are more charismatic. And if we had competition in some of that ways, you'd defeat me in these things. There's not an equality if all we are is merely physical. Where is the equality? Where is it? It's not in just the physical, though the physical is in fact sacred. There's something about you that's better than that, or not better, more. The physical is sacred because the spiritual is sacred. You don't have a body. You aren't a body. You have a body. As C.S. Lewis said, you have a body, you are a soul. And that soul has the imago Dei on it, the image of God. His fingerprints are all over you. So the ultimate value giver gives you ultimate value. Otherwise, you're just a glob of tissue. You're a DNA machine. But redemption says that the purpose we were made for, which was relationship, we violated it. Ravi defined sin very easily. He said that sin is merely the violation of purpose. What sin is, the violation of purpose. And the ultimate sin was the violation of our ultimate purpose, which is relationship with God. And every moral value we've had since then has been marred in some way. The cross comes to tell us that there is a moral relevance to our decisions, each one of them. And if it were not so, there would be no cross. But it's not just payment, it's actually the flowering of life after it. Because if Jesus died on the cross and stayed dead, how would you know he was right? How would you know? But the glory of the Christian faith is that Jesus rose from the dead so we can know he was right. When he said that you are in need of a Savior who's not you. And that he was that Savior. And then he rose from the dead to prove he was right. And in rising from the dead, he gives us life. He cleans us up. That which is wrong is made right. That which seems valueless is given ultimate value and proven it. Because Jesus did not come to change policy. Jesus did not come to make bad people good. He came to make dead people live. God bless you. Thank you so much.
All right. Abdu, you said that God is a pretext or a necessary foundation for morality and equality and justice. There are 1.5 billion people in the world that would agree with you, but they would claim a God that you formerly worshiped and dedicated your life to rather than the one that you currently are saved by. In other words, Islam. So how do you respond to the fact that many people would agree, but they might have a different moral assumption as a result of the God they've chosen?
That's a great question, because oftentimes if we're talking about God as the foundation, that doesn't detract. The fact that people actually believe in different sort of ideas about who God is, or different gods altogether, doesn't detract from the argument. The argument still is, we need a personal, transcendent source for morality in the first place. Because think about this. What are moral values at all? What are they? What are they? Moral values like justice and equality and kindness and compassion are personal qualities, aren't they? No one says, there goes compassion, look how good compassion is being. Compassion can't be compassionate. It's an abstraction, isn't it? If it's just sort of floating out there in a platonic sense. Just sitting out there. Justice can't be just. Goodness can't be good. We need a personal anchor for these things. So if we want to believe that they exist independent of human opinion, but they also need to have a personal anchor, then the source, the anchor, has to be a person that doesn't depend on human perception or opinion. And that sounds very much like God. Now the question is, what is he like? What is that moral character like? And because there are different conceptions of God, whether it's the Islamic conception of God, the Hindu ideas,
the Buddhist ideas, non-theistic ideas, whatever it might be. Now the question becomes, whose God is the one whose morality is determinative here? And that's an important question because they are different. People often say that religions are only superficially different, they're fundamentally the same. It's exactly the opposite. They're all superficially the same and fundamentally different. This idea, all roads lead you to God. They don't even claim to. They don't. Islam doesn't say you get to go to God. Islam says you get to have a paradise that God has given you, but you never get to have communion with God. Never. Classical Buddhism says you're not trying to become enlightened to go to nirvana and have heaven or have some kind of state of bliss. Classical Buddhism, as Buddha taught it, was that you become nothing. You extinguish. Very different destinations. To say they're all the same insults all of them. We're trying to compliment them, but actually what you're doing is insulting all of them because you haven't read them. So the question is, who's right and who's wrong on this one? Here's how I look at it. As I said, any worldview has to have logical consistency, empirical adequacy, and existential relevance. Let me give you a framework of this. Logical consistency tells us that what is real has to comport with what we hope is real. In other words, our philosophies have to be consistent. We are flawed. We need someone who's not us to save us from us. I think that's clear. And Jesus says, I fulfill that. And here's how I do it, through the atonement. I can pay for it. Now, the empirical adequacy of how I know he was right comes in the historical fact of the resurrection. Every worldview that's not Christian rejects the resurrection. It says, no, Jesus didn't die and rise from the dead. He either died and stayed dead, or in Islam, some say he never died at all. Now, what's interesting is that every other worldview tells you, in order to know that what I'm telling you is true, look to the teaching. Look to the beauty of the teaching. When someone asks Gautama Buddha, how do I know that what you're saying, that the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path are true? He said, look to my Dharma, look to my teaching, and you'll see the beauty of it. That's subjective. The Qur'an, Islam, actually says, how do you know Islam is true? Look to the incomparable beauty and content of the Qur'an. That's subjective. You could say it's beautiful, I could say, you could say, Now we're just like 8-year-old children in a schoolyard. There's no objective nature to knowing if it's true or not. A complete distinction to that, Jesus Christ actually answers differently. In John chapter 2, verses 18 and following, the religious leaders are asking him what authority he thinks he has to overturn the money changers' tables and to say and do the things he's doing in all of Judea. And you know what he says when they say, who do you think you are? He says, destroy this body, and in 3 days I will raise it up. He didn't say, look to my teaching and my flowery words, although he did have beautiful words and wonderful truths for us to live by. But so did other people. He didn't say that. He said, there's an objective reality. Either I will die and stay dead, or I will rise from the dead. That will either happen or not happen. If you look at 1 Corinthians chapter 15, that's what Paul says. If Christ is dead, and he's still dead, then stop believing. You are a miserable wretch, essentially. You are a fool. Jesus gives you an objective test. So I know from the facts of history, and I'm going to give a really, really short answer to this. It's a much longer talk I give on this, actually, on how you can know Jesus Christ actually rose from the dead as an objective historical fact. First is that we know he died by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate. He died. And this is important because 1.5 billion Muslims think he didn't. He didn't die on that cross. He died under Pontius Pilate. John Dominic Crossan, himself a skeptic of the historic Christian faith, says that Jesus died on a cross under Pontius Pilate is as historical a fact as any ever could be. That there was an experience his disciples had, all of them had an experience where they believed that they saw the risen Christ 3 days later. Not that they saw the risen Christ in a hallucination. They said, we saw him, and not having survived the cross, but having been risen from the dead. And they all believed it. This is important, not because someone convinced them it was true, but because they said, I saw it. Now, if they didn't see it, they knew they were lying. Yet all of them were either willing to or actually did undergo torture and death for this belief. That's why Paula Fredrickson, herself a skeptic, says, I know they must have seen something. So the appearances to the disciples, and then the skeptics, Paul and James. James, the half-brother of Jesus, actually thought he was a quack and a kook. And then he saw his brother risen from the dead and said, I'm going to now be the leader of the Jerusalem church because of that fact. Changed him. Paul was an enemy, a skeptic, a persecutor of the church. And he suddenly changes his convictions about all this and sees the truth of it because he sees the risen Christ. What accounts for those conversions? Better than the resurrection? I can't think of anything. And then fourthly and finally, the empty tomb. It was known, we knew where it was, and we knew it was empty 3 days later. So his death, his appearances, the skeptics changed, and the empty tomb all show you something, that Jesus, when he said, I will raise this temple, his body, up from the dead, he was right. Why do I think that Christianity is the truth? Because Jesus said it was the truth, and he died and rose from the dead, and guys who rise from the dead have credibility. Not me, but he does. Thanks.
How do you answer those who not only say that man is basically good, but say it's institutions, specifically religious institutions, that cause the fighting wars we find in the world?
Well, in some degree, I agree with them. Religious institutions do, in fact, cause a lot of problems in the world. There's a book by Philip Yancey. It's called Soul Survivor. And in that book, he's talking about how he survived essentially abuse in the church and some problems in the church. And he quotes, I think it was Chesterton again, who said, look, the fact that the church messes up is actually evidence that the church is right. Because the church says that people will act in accordance with sin. And there's a backup to that. There's a reality to that. Now, here's the problem. You have to judge a worldview not by its abuse, but by its foundations, by the morals it actually teaches. So when you see things that seem like abuses, you can judge them as abuses. They are, in fact, abuses. Whether it's rampant homophobia and people, carrying these signs with these disgusting phrases on them about God's, views towards certain people. In the city of Dearborn, where I come from, actually, there are Christian, I'm going to use that in loose terms, who come to the city of Dearborn. Many of them just want to start a ruckus and sort of insult us Muslims. Many of them actually want to evangelize and show love to Christians. My closest friends are the ones who do that, but there are some who don't. That's an abuse, of course. Islam, you see it in the news today, you see all these things. Buddhism, by the way, there's plenty of violence in Buddhism around the world. There's also plenty of violence in atheism. Stuart McAllister will tell you, Stuart McAllister from Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, before he went to RZIM, used to smuggle Bibles under the Iron Curtain. That's what he did. You know what they used to ask him as he was going to the border? 3 questions. Do you have guns? Do you have drugs? Do you have Bibles? Because they don't want Christianity in their countries. Their atheism is a militant atheism. And Joseph Stalin is probably one of the biggest murderers of all murderers in the world, in the logical extension of his brand of atheism. Mao Zedong wanted to exterminate the church in China and was a despot himself. Pol Pot, you name it. There's abuses on all sides. Every worldview is capable of being abused. Some actually are the logical outworking of that worldview. And that's the issue. So you don't judge a worldview by its abuse, you judge it by its foundational teachings. And if you see violence or trouble in the world, the question you have to ask yourself is that the logical outworking of what the worldview teaches? I have a hard time believing Christopher Hitchens when he says that religion poisons everything, when I look at Jesus' words and he says, pray for those who persecute you and love your enemies. How do you justify unequal treatment, even of your enemies? And I look back and I see myself a statement from Romans chapter 5, the one that really changed me, by the way, the one that really got me to see that Jesus is who he claimed to be and that God in the Bible is the God I wish were true. For God demonstrates his love for us in this, that while we were sinners, God's enemies, those who hate him, he doesn't vanquish his enemies, he gives his son. Christ dies for his enemies. You and I will sacrifice for those who love us back. And we will sacrifice for strangers. We don't sacrifice for our enemies. You want to see the foundations of a worldview? You look at that foundation and say, how in the world can you say that is inherently violent? That is inherently self-sacrificial. If there is a God who is great, that's the one. Thank you for the question.
Can you share your personal come to Jesus story?
Say it again.
Can you share your personal come to Jesus story?
Sure. I'll give you the Cliff Notes version of that. I was a pretty serious Shiite Muslim. I thought, I had this crazy, weird idea. People should believe true things and not false things. Because that's a little bit of a shaky ground nowadays. And I thought Islam was true. And Christianity was basically a once true religious system that we became perverted over time to include ideas like the Trinity and the Incarnation and all these kind of things. And the Bible was a corrupted book. It was once God's revelation, but became corrupted, and all these things. And so I wanted to knock the faith out of Christians. Now, I was a bit of an equal opportunity faither, knocker, outer, over, you know? There were plenty of non-Christians around me, but Christians were low-hanging fruit in the neighborhood I grew up in. So I would ask them a foundational question. Why are you a Christian? You know how many people have a hard time answering that question? Now, I'm not trying to pick on them. It's just, think about it. It's why are you a Christian? There's about 10,000 reasons probably why you are a Christian. But I was trying to get at what is the objective reason, other than that he changed my life reason. Now, that's not invalid. It's just, you know. But here's the answer I got most often from them. Because I was raised that way. We go to church, we go to the Presbyterian church or the Wesleyan church or the whatever church on Christmas and Easter, and I guess that's why I'm a Methodist or whatever it was they were. I had a follow-up question to that one. Is that a good enough reason? You're telling me you trust your eternal soul to a worldview that somebody else believes? It's not a good enough reason. So as I began to try to show people, look, you're slavishly believing a tradition and there's no evidence behind it, and I would challenge the authenticity of the Bible and all these things, I began to have pretty good results with this, actually. And then there were a couple of guys, Dave and Pete. I love Dave and Pete. Dave and Pete were two Baptist guys who were going door to door at the apartment complexes at the University of Michigan to share the gospel with people. And if you know anything about Ann Arbor, Michigan, you know it's like going to Berkeley and saying Jesus is Lord. It's a little bit tough. They came to my door, and it was like, all right. So Dave and Pete came in, and they came. Dave and Pete loved me. I could tell they loved me. I was not their project. I think I was at first, but I began to really like Dave and Pete, and they began to really like me. Now, I made Dave and Pete uncomfortable for like 3 and 4 hours at a time. But they kept coming back. And I was wondering why that was. It's because they didn't want me to go to hell. And I didn't want them to go to hell. We would talk about the weather and other things as well, but mostly it was these debates. And I wanted to find a contradiction in the Bible, something wrong with the Bible that I could finally knock Dave and Pete down with. Because they were like one of those punching bags or one of those dolls you hit and it goes like that when you hit it. It comes back up. I wanted to knock them down and have them stay down. So as I was walking down the street in the University of Michigan, I saw these Gideons who were getting ready to hand out Bibles. So I took a Bible, a little green Bible. I still have it, by the way. It's in my bag. And tried to convert the Gideon. Didn't work, but I tried to convert the Gideon. Went over to my college apartment, opened up this Bible to try to find a flaw and a contradiction in it. And that's when the words actually hit me. Luke chapter 3, verses 7 and following. John the Baptist is talking to those who are coming to him to be baptized, and he says, "Who told you to flee from the wrath to come?" Meaning God's judgment, of course. "And do not even begin to think to yourself, you have Abraham as your father," as if that would save them from God's wrath. "For I tell you, God can raise up sons of Abraham from the stones." You know what he's saying there? Tradition is not a valid reason to believe in something or to hope in. Now, it might be right, but if that's the reason you're believing it, it's not. I was saying the same thing. That's what I was saying. And he was agreeing with me. I didn't feel validation when I read that, though. You know why? Because in all the times I'd asked a Christian, "Why are you a Christian?" they never asked me, "Why are you a Muslim?" But John the Baptist, I believe, through the power of the Holy Spirit working 20 centuries, reached a college kid on his ratty, nasty chair in his apartment with the question, "Why are you a Muslim?" And I knew it was tradition. I had to be. You know, I had found all these evidences to believe in Islam, but the real reason was because I had to be. Now that's important, because the Bible itself speaks. I was a skeptic of the Bible, and it wasn't like I found evidence at that point to corroborate the Bible. It was that the Bible's words themselves actually touched me. So ladies and gentlemen, you know, you can quote all the Marcelo Peras and Jürgen Habermas's and all these folks you want. Quote the Bible. Don't speak from lofty arguments in a closed Bible. And that's what got me on the road to actually looking at the evidence. And when I saw the evidence for the Bible's authenticity, for the resurrection of Jesus, and that the God I wished were true, the God who was great. You know, you hear this phrase, Allahu Akbar, right? You always hear this phrase, and something bad happens whenever you hear it. But really, it means God is greater. I wanted to believe in a God who was ultimately great, the greatest possible being. And then I saw in the gospel that the greatest possible being exists because the greatest possible being would express the greatest possible ethic, which is love, in the greatest possible way, and that's self-sacrifice, and that's what the cross is. And I gave my life to Christ for that.
I can take this 10 more minutes if you have other questions. Raise your hand if you have one. I want to ask one as we get ready for this one right here, Abdu, because I want to make sure I squeeze this in. So if this is the last 2 questions, I want to make sure you have a chance to respond to this. You were a Muslim, we know that, and you've talked to us about one topic, but one thing I want you to share before you close today is advice that you would give us on how to respond to the confusion, the anger, the fear that so many in our culture today fear from Muslims. Okay? And I know you want to speak to that, and I know I've asked you that before. So go ahead and answer that one, and then we have one more question right here.
By the way, this seems like an off-topic question, but it only seems that way. Because we react the same way to everyone who would seem to oppose sort of traditional Christian values. Muslims seem to be doing that, and so do some others. We're talking about directly in this very conference. How you respond to Muslims is the same way you respond to them. Same way you respond, I think, is that you realize something. The gospel doesn't tell you that you are better than them or that somehow you have something inherently in you that makes you better than them, and so they're them and we're us, and there's a separation there, an us versus them mentality. The gospel should be the last place you would ever expect that, because what it tells you and me is that we are all in the same wind. We all smell the same wind. And so that's our Muslim friends and our Muslim enemies, by the way, and our other opponents in other areas who seem to be our opponents. They were Christ's enemies before they were yours. And he didn't treat them with derision and fear. By the way, in Islam, for example, most Muslims in this country, as an example, I don't know one radical Muslim. I don't know one. And I know a lot of Muslims. I don't know one radical. Now, that is not to say that they're not out there. They are. Obviously, they're out there. Obviously, they're here. That's true. I don't want to be naive about this kind of thing. There's radicals of every stripe within Islam and other religious systems and other worldviews and this kind of things. But if you walk around expecting to have something bad happen to you, or fearing your Muslim neighbors or your other neighbors, whether they're homosexual or they're homosexual activists or they're whatever they might claim to be that's antithetical to your belief system, you'll never actually reach those people. Look, we need to defend ourselves militarily when it comes to the physical violence around the world. We need to do that. Absolutely we need to do that. I'm not remotely suggesting that we don't do that. But here's the way the world changes. Here's the way the impact is made the greatest. For every Muslim you talk to about the love of Jesus Christ and you give them the empirical adequacy, the logical consistency, and the relevance of the gospel message, that's one less person who sees you as the radical ideology would depict you. They see you as someone who's also redeemed by Christ, and they see themselves as someone for whom Christ died. We're all in the same wind. It's hard to hurt someone who's just like you. It really is. And there's an equality there. There's an equality there. We need to share the gospel openly. Don't be afraid. By the way, if you have a Muslim friend or a Muslim neighbor, or you're traveling and you're sitting next to one on a plane, and you think, oh boy, I can't talk about religion or politics with this person. That's all they want to talk about, actually. I thought it was the weirdest thing growing up that Americans don't like talking about religion and politics. Yes, you really do, by the way. You really do. But no one wants to talk about it in polite conversation. And I always wondered to myself, what in the world else is there to talk about? I mean, I like sports like the next guy. I do. But after a while, sports scores get old. Let's talk about ultimate truths, the reality of life. Let's talk about these things. They want to talk about it. So if you ask them a question, what do you think of Jesus? You're going to get an actual, honest-to-goodness answer back. And by the way, shut up and listen. Let them talk. Make friends with them. And not because they're your project. Don't be their caseworker. I had missionary caseworker friends. Go good. Joe Schmo's coming over today, right on time for his appointment. That kind of a thing. They see it from a mile away. So reach out to them Most of them are not sitting around, behind stairwells, twisting mustaches, thinking of ways to blow up the airport. They're not doing that. Some are. Most of them are not. Talk to them. Ask them the important questions of life. Get involved in their lives. Find out about their children. Learn their culture. If you learn an Arabic word, for example, you will make an innocent friend. By the way, one of the best reasons to engage in Muslim evangelism is the food. It's great stuff. It's great stuff. I'm looking for an Arabic restaurant in this state. Hopefully I'll find one. I've been here numerous times. It's got to, if you want to open up one, I'll seed the money with that one because I want to see that. So reach out in love. And by the way, don't fear. Even if there's going to be a hostile situation, don't fear it. I mean, yeah, there's always this trepidation that happens, but realize something, that you were promised that. You were promised trouble because of the gospel's sake. You were promised that. God never told you it was going to be easy. If God told you it was going to be easy and it ends up not being, then maybe you can yell at him and say, hey, you broke a promise. The promise he told you was it's going to be hard. So when it gets hard, trust him. He's always right. And he was right about that too. So reach out in love, give them the truth, show them that what you believe is true, that what they wish were true is actually true in the Bible. And I just want to show you, say this before I go on to the last question here. Blaise Pascal made an interesting statement. This is the principle by which philosophically, I see him corroborating what the Bible says, and this is how I undergird all of my evangelism and all of my discussions with non-Christians or people who oppose my beliefs, whatever it might be. Blaise Pascal said this. He said, men despise religion because they fear that it may be true. The way to combat this, the remedy for this, is not just blind faith. It is to show them that religion is not contrary to reason, but comports with it. Next, he says, make it attractive. Make good men wish it were true, and then show them that it is. Colossians chapter 4, verses 5 and 6. Paul the Apostle says, by the way, right after he asks them to pray for opportunities for him to preach the gospel, I always thought John Giroge actually makes a point of this. He says, I always thought Paul was, sort of running into opportunities left and right to preach the gospel. He actually asked people to pray so he has more, which means that he probably needed some sometimes. And if you're praying for that, you'll get them. Paul certainly got them. This is what he says, though, in verses 5 and 6 of Colossians 4. Be careful how you walk toward outsiders, or be wise in how you walk toward outsiders. So first of all, walk toward them, making the best use of the time, letting your speech always be gracious and seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer each person, not question. Ladies and gentlemen, you're not in the question-answering business. Questions don't need answers. People do. And Paul said that. You answer each person specifically because they are someone who's got a baggage and a background and a question that matters to them in some way that the gospel can answer.
Last question.
Sorry. I have a good friend who is a coworker and a Muslim, and we eat lunch together off and on. And in light, and this is along the vein of what you've already been talking about, but in light of the talk or the speeches last night and our subject here, could you give us some insights into the Muslim marriage and the family that might be helpful in talking to people?
Sure. Well, just so you understand, in a Muslim paradigm, it's a little more complex than it might seem at first. Muslims tend to be very, very socially conservative. No dating, these kind of things, and the women, there's a bit of a double standard. Men can have 4 wives, women can only be the wife of one man. So it's kind of there's a polygamy that happens there in classical Islam. It doesn't happen here in America for a couple of reasons. One, it's illegal, and 2, they just don't do it. Most of them don't want to have multiple wives. They don't. And I don't think the wives would tolerate it for a second, by the way, either. So there's that. Marriage is terribly important. Family is terribly important. In fact, one of the biggest issues that creates a problem for a Muslim to come out of Islam and into a relationship with Christ is the fear that they would lose that family. That bond is incredibly important. Sam Solomon points it out this way. He says, if you were to draw a circle and put a dot in the middle, in the West, the dot is community and religious identity, and the circle is you. You're way more important individually than you are as collective. In the East and in the Middle East, it's exactly the opposite. The dot is you, and the circle is community and religious identity and family. So family is terribly important. They would never actually condone, for example, they would never say same-sex marriage is okay. They wouldn't say that. I can't think of one Muslim I know who would actually say that. Now, there are sort of liberal Muslims who actually take some sort of a reformist view of Islam. It's a growing minority, by the way, but most Muslims are very socially conservative, especially when it comes to family and the nature of marriage. One of the reasons why you don't have Muslims jumping on and saying we are for traditional marriage is because they can't actually Islamically say they believe in a marriage as one man and one woman. They can't do that. But they can say that it is opposite sex or complementary sex based. They can say that. So they do have a commonality with conservative Christians on this. So we can actually talk to them about these things and use that as a bridge. But the important thing to understand is that if you're trying to reach them for Christ, they're thinking about family and loss of family. The consequences of truth are oftentimes the real reason someone doesn't believe something. Not because the truth is there or it's not there, it's because if it is there and they embrace it, there's going to be bad consequences, almost exclusively in Islam because of the family situation. They'll be rejected and they'll be cast out. So that's how important it actually is. There's a funny thing because we think of our rampant individualism and yet we're trying to save the family here in the West. They have a very low view of individualism, a very high view of community. And so we can learn something from them in this respect. Now, not everything, because there's some things that are always a problem. So I don't know if I'm getting to the heart of your question, but my point is this, that if we recognize the strength of families, we recognize that that family strength comes with a little bit of baggage. They all do, don't they? I mean, there's always that one, in the family, or the 10 in the family, whatever it might be. So we have that. But if you're trying to form a bond with a Muslim friend, there's a commonality. If you have a very high view of family, a very high view of cohesion, of the necessity of a father and a mother, they share that same exact thing. They want their boys to be raised by both a mother and a father so that they see the beauty of how a boy should treat a woman and how a boy should become a man. I'll tell you this, I remember this very vividly in my own childhood. About my dad, what a model he was for me to be a man. And my dad is about as macho as it gets. But he's also a good teacher. He really was. He modeled self-sacrifice. He modeled what it was to be a caretaker, a caregiver, and a warrior. My mother was the tender heart of that. And I got that from both of them. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. God bless you.
Abdu, thank you.